Bonjour, good morning, hello. As leaders of the Green Party of Canada, welcome. Nous avons l'idée pour les résolutions de nouvelle année pour le gouvernement libéral. C'est jamais trop tard pour les résolutions. I think we're all feeling that. It's only January 4th. Time to take on some commitments, personal and societal. And I know Justin Trudeau has hired people to give them a new narrative. We suggest that the country needs to pull together and that the narrative people want to see isn't a new story, but results. So with that in mind, we have resolutions, New Year's resolutions, along the themes of peace, order, and good government. And with that, je donne la parole à mon collègue, mon partenaire, Jonathan Pedneault, le chef adjoint du Parti vert au Canada.
Merci, Elizabeth. Thank you. Good to see you all and Happy New Year. Bonne année à tous et à toutes. Une bonne année qui commence quand même à la fin d'une année qui a été difficile pour beaucoup de Canadiens. Tough year for a lot of Canadians throughout the country as the country has been faced with tremendous extreme weather events, the fire season from 2023, which has been devastating for so many communities, not to mention, of course, the various storms that we've had, electricity loss, so many homes that have been, and communities that have been faced with these challenges, the rise of anger and hatred throughout our communities as a result, in parts, of the difficult economic conditions that we're faced with, not only here in Canada, but throughout the world. Politicians, political leaders who are steadfastly using this rise in anger in the communities to advance political points, but at the detriment of social cohesion. Donc, c'est important que là, les libéraux puis nos amis néo-démocrates qui les supportent prennent véritablement le pouls de la nation. On a une nation qui a fait face, on a un pays qui a fait face à de nombreuses crises, des crises qui ont été difficiles sur le plan climatique, mais surtout sur le plan social et économique. Les Canadiens ont de la difficulté à se rendre à la fin du mois présentement. Donc, c'est essentiel pour maintenir justement un bon gouvernement, l'ordre de la paix dans ce pays, qu'on ait un gouvernement libéral qui prenne de bonnes résolutions pour 2024. Parmi celles-là, il faut absolument prioriser la lutte contre la pauvreté dans ce pays. Ça fait des années qu'on appelle à un revenu de base garanti, quelque chose qui permettrait à de nombreuses familles partout à travers le pays de sortir de la pauvreté, de s'élever. Faut le dire, là, il y en a de l'argent dans ce pays. There is money in this country, but it's poorly distributed. We've been calling for many years for a guaranteed livable income. This is a great opportunity right now that Canada has. We've got the money. The money is there. We saw just a couple of days ago that CEOs in this country have already made in one day more than the average Canadian salary, roughly $60,000 in one day, with average salaries that range around $15 million a year. That is a lot of money. And money needs to be taxed and it needs to be redistributed. Now, the burden of that taxation cannot be on the middle class. It needs to be, and we'd love to see some courage and some determination from our Liberal and NDP friends to actually go and get the money where it is and redistribute it. So we're not talking about printing new money. We're talking about redistributing the wealth that currently exists in this country. Donc, un revenu de base garanti nous apparaît absolument essentiel. De la même partie, il faut qu'il y ait des investissements significatifs dans le logement abordable. C'est quelque chose qui est absolument top of mind pour la plupart des Canadiens présentement. On a encore, et puis, il suffit de se promener à Montréal, à Toronto, à Kitchener pour voir des camps de personnes sans abri, des gens qui ont de la difficulté à trouver un logement, pas simplement des gens qui sont en difficulté mentale ou qui font face à des problèmes de consommation, mais aussi des familles, des gens qui ont été poussés à l'extérieur de leur logement et qui n'ont pas de place où vivre. Nous, on a appelé depuis maintenant un an à ce qu'on appelle les REITs, les Real Estate Investment Trust Funds, qui possèdent et qui amènent à la financiarisation du marché, soit mieux taxés. C'est possible qu'on ait bientôt un peu plus loin dans nos demandes sur ce front-là parce que à travers le pays, c'est près de 20% du marché immobilier locatif qui est possédé par des Real Investment Trust Funds qui sont absolument déterminés à ne faire qu'une chose, pas à fournir du logement aux gens, mais à faire des profits. Et on ne peut pas avoir un marché locatif qui ne se base que sur la recherche du profit dans un pays comme le nôtre. We can't have a rental real estate market that is solely focused on the margins of profit. We need to have a humane market here, and that might demand that the government acts more directly to make sure that the 20% of the real estate market that is currently owned by real estate investment trust funds be led in the direction of providing affordable housing, and we'll come up with some concrete solutions and propositions for this government very soon. But that is something where we'd love to see the government take more of a strong lead. I'll pass it back to you now.
Merci. I participated in COP28 in Dubai from November 30th till December 14th. So very much on my mind, of course, is the climate crisis. Canada played a very positive and constructive role at COP28, to be clear, so that credit where credit's due. I was pleased to know that my government was working with a coalition of countries working for the language phase out fossil fuels. We got strong language in what is now called the United Arab Emirates Consensus on climate. It will require that Canada revisit the targets we tabled with the United Nations a couple of years ago. We need to up those and increase our commitments to reduce emissions and to increase work towards adaptation and preparation in developing countries and in Canada, frankly. Our adaptation strategy needs to be revisited with urgency because it doesn't save lives in Canada the way it could. But to be very clear, I'm focused on some positive things here about our country and our opportunities. One positive thing I just want to note as we ended off 2023, as bad a year as it was, I was struck by the Angus Reid Institute work on how Canadians felt about the year. Overall, the great majority of Canadians expressed that they are happy with how they feel about their life in their country. I particularly was struck by the fact that the word used most often by Canadians to describe 2020, how you feel at the end of 2023, the word was grateful. And I think we have to stress as leaders in this country, regardless of party, that this is the best country in the world. Who would want to live anywhere else? Starting with gratitude, I think, is a good place for 2024. And there's an opportunity that Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault, and particularly Mary Ng, can grab, which is the upcoming 13th ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization, which is in late February, and of all things, again, in United Arab Emirates. It's a huge opportunity to actually fix what's been wrong with climate agreements from the get-go, and that is that unlike previous agreements that worked, such as the Montreal Protocol that actually has saved the ozone layer, the climate agreements, not one of them, have been allowed to have essentially teeth. Just a good set of gums, no teeth. And the teeth that were in the Montreal Protocol that saved the ozone layer and that are missing in every climate agreement is effective enforcement of global treaties, and that effective enforcement requires that trade sanctions are available to governments. Now, to take a step further, we can't go back and renegotiate the Paris Agreement, but we can, and we should, ensure that the United Arab Emirates Consensus from December 2023 be the overarching goal of the United Arab Emirates 13th Trade Ministerial in February 2024, and that we as a country and that Minister Ng lead the charge that says all the Paris Agreement targets supersede trade deals, and within the World Trade Organization, this needs to be understood so that there aren't trade impediments put in the way of the commitment that was just taken on, the world triple our investments in renewable energy, for example. And trade objections have gotten in the way of renewable energy uptake. It's going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And we know from the decisions made in Dubai that these decisions have to come with urgency. One last point quickly on foreign affairs, I'll turn it back to Jonathan. And there's an overlap on climate and and affordability, Putin's war in Ukraine has driven up the price of everything. And it's also the Russia, Putin is still living on sales of oil. So we need to make the sanctions bite harder into Russia's economy. We must support Ukraine. Ukraine can't lose this war, but the best way to end a war is through a negotiated settlement. And Russia is not going to go to the table when the sanctions aren't hurting its economy, and Putin believes he can just continue. So there's a much larger conversation here, but I'll just close off. I'll ask Jonathan to close it off, and we'll open for your questions. But we need to look back at 2024 as the year we turned the corner on climate and restored global peace and order and an end to the hostilities we've been seeing. It can be done, and Canada can play an important role. We have done in the past. Nous sommes comme les Canadiens, notre pays a un rôle de leadership dans le monde. Enfin, nous avons le rôle important dans le monde, dans les Nations Unies. Jonathan, pour terminer.
Yeah, just to close, Elizabeth was talking about order, about, of course, extremely tragic events abroad. The Liberal government needs to lead again, quite frankly. The Canadians expect that and demand and need that from their government right now. We're seeing the Federation being torn apart right now by provincial politicians, whether it's, of course, Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, Danielle Smith, François Legault, quite frankly, often not much of a friend of this government's policies. Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. We're seeing attacks on the Federation from several provincial leaders, and that is having a great impact on our collective ability as a country to fix the housing crisis, to fix the healthcare crisis, to fix the education crisis as well. And that needs to be tackled on in the same way that we need, as part of a family of nations, we need to stand strong in support of Ukraine, but also in support of justice throughout the world. As with most Canadians, we're following closely the situation in Israel and Palestine as well. We've been calling for a ceasefire since the very beginning of this operation in Gaza. We're taking note. We've taken note, of course, of the South African proceedings in front of the International Court of Justice. We ask that Canada support, at the very least, this judicial process and awaits the results of the court's decision on whether or not the State of Israel is currently committing genocide. And whatever the ruling is, Canada will need and needs to support the conclusions of the International Court of Justice, just as we've done in the past. This is it's an international court that we've helped establish many decades ago, and if we are to stand strongly for international rights and international law, then we need to be consistent in our approach, and so it's going to be important that Canada follows through with whatever the decision is in that regard. So with that, I think we'll take some questions.
You've been co-leaders for almost a year now. I was wondering, so you had resolutions for the Liberal government. What are your resolutions for the next year?
Well, we're building so that we just won a pretty decisive one, the Green Party of Ontario, but Greens won a very decisive upset in Kitchener Centre. We have to be winning more seats federally and provincially across the country. In Kitchener Centre, Ashland Clancy's vote was more than the combined votes of those for the NDP, Liberal, and Conservative candidates combined. And it's not like the other parties gave that riding a pass. Pierre Poilievre held a rally in Kitchener Centre on a night that I was also in Kitchener Centre. Jagmeet Singh went door to door in Kitchener Centre. They weren't giving it a pass. We are very laser focused. I know this ever since John Baird first said that. I said, I've got to stop myself from saying laser focused. But we are laser focused on finding great candidates to stand in federal seats so that we will run a convincing group of candidates coast to coast to coast, electable, and we will elect Green members of Parliament in which we do think will be a 2025 election. We're very focused on that and on sharing as we are today. I mean, these are really good ideas. Liberals can pick these up and run with them. If Mary Ng and Justin Trudeau decide to get I mean, this is great timing. Maybe other people are working on this. I don't know of anybody who's noticed that the February 13, I mean, I haven't been to a WTO ministerial for some time. I was at the first WTO ministerial and the third WTO ministerial, but WTO ministerials don't have the same, somehow or other, they don't have the same degree of public awareness that when everybody was being tear gassed. They seem to have a lot of public awareness whenever there was a WTO ministerial. This is an opportunity for Canada to make a real difference, not just in our own domestic climate policies, but on making these climate agreements work. Our goal is to be, as ever, cooperative, helpful, and healing to this country while ensuring Canadians know who we are and that they need to elect more Greens.
Yeah. Juste pour continuer peut-être un petit peu en français rapidement, on va faire face en 2025 à l'élection la plus importante qu'on a eue de mon histoire à moi, de ma vie à moi. This country cannot afford to go back on climate, on social justice issues, on inequality. We now have someone who wants to be prime minister, who is steadfast, who is committed to, quite frankly, attack and destroy the things that make this country work and the things that make us proud of being part of this country. The style of leadership that is being brought forward by this individual is detrimental to the cooperation that is needed between provinces, cities, the federal government, and between Canadians. This country is stronger when we stand united. This man's political genius, sadly, is in dividing us and pitting us against one another. And this is not something that we can afford to incentivize. So our job as a political party, as a progressive political party, will be to propose solutions that will, Canadians need to start dreaming again. The future can actually look much brighter, much brighter than what we're in right now, but there's a need for changes, right? The Liberals came in 2015 on the back of many promises and failed to deliver on them. Yeah. The Conservatives, sadly, quite often they're too good at holding their promises, but their promises are not very it's not a very promising future for the country, especially with the style of leadership that we're seeing from Monsieur Poilievre. There are other alternatives. We are one of such alternatives. The future can look fundamentally different and much better for many, many Canadians.
Just on that, you were talking about unity, and I think your comments were pointed at Mr. Poilievre, I believe, but there are, the Liberals, the NDP, the Green Party, even the Bloc Québécois are pushing for more housing, more climate action. Isn't the progressive field a little crowded? And in that sense, I guess my question would be, why would the Green Party be more relevant than those other parties pushing for the same things?
But where are the Liberals? They've been in power for 8 years right now. Lots of Canadians believed in their progressive agenda, and they failed to deliver. We now have more homeless people throughout the country than ever before. Right? We have a housing crisis. We have a food affordability crisis. People are struggling right now as a result of failed policies, failed leadership from the Liberals. Yeah. So they're not a progressive alternative. They're a status quo alternative. And the NDP, sadly, has been incentivizing that by supporting them with their confidence and supply agreements. There is another alternative, and it's called green.
Yeah. I would just say, when Jonathan reminds me of the promises of the 2015 election campaign, I mean, I've been involved in politics for quite a while. You wouldn't think I'd be so naive. I completely believed that 2015 was the last election under first past the post. And so did millions of voters who changed the way they normally vote, voted Liberal. It's a key promise that led to the 2015 election results. 2015 was supposed to be the last election under first past the post. That wasn't in any way an ambiguous promise, and it was transferred from their platform right into the speech from the throne and then betrayed. That kind of thing feeds public cynicism. And and of course they also promised, I also did not think that they would even approve the Kinder Morgan pipeline, much less buy it and make it a public project that is going above $31 billion in cost, 31,000 millions. We sometimes say billion as if it's a bit more than a million. My God, $31 billion for a pipeline that in the 2015 election, Trudeau had said he couldn't approve. So we do not want to join in the general bandwagon of public cynicism, but people have to be held accountable for promises and broken promises, and keeping your promises is an important part of keeping this country and our society willing to give the benefit of the doubt to our institutions. It's very fundamental to a democracy that Canadians, that voters, that citizens believe their vote makes a difference, and that people in public life keep their promises. So in terms of a progressive party, is the field crowded? No, we stand here alone. I don't see anybody else. I really don't see any other party that takes the climate crisis seriously and sees it as a genuine opportunity for greater equity and fairness across our society.
And a new Nanos poll says that about 50% of Canadians think there should be an election this year, 50% say no. You mentioned you think an election would be potentially in 2025. If there were to be an election in 2024, do you think that's good for the country? And also, how do you think that the Green Party would fare in that case?
Regardless of when an election happens, the Green Party is going to surprise people with electing a lot more MPs than we've had in the past. I don't think an election in 2024 is a good idea. However, we had an election in 2021. Everybody had sort of a gut sense, it's too soon. What's the reason for an election now? We have a fixed election date by law in this country. It's been violated more often than it's been honored, starting with Stephen Harper. But there's something very, very good right now, I think, about giving the country the breathing space. Not to make excuses for the Liberals, but my God, they've got some good excuses. We were hit with a pandemic that has really not yet run its course in terms of its impact on supply chains, its impact on our recovery, and our impact on our social fabric. So between pandemic and extraordinary spending, which, by the way, was unanimously approved in the House of Commons, I mean, the huge amounts of spending on CEBA and CERB and all of that was unanimous because we didn't have the methods in place to vote separately. I mean, this is not that long ago. I'm sure everybody in this room remembers, but it's easy to forget, especially when you listen to Pierre Poilievre. You'd think that he had nothing to do with all the COVID spending that was, again, unanimously approved in Parliament. I think it will help our economy to give ourselves the breathing room of not having an election in 2024, going into an election in 2025. It's the fixed election date. I think as a matter of reality, there isn't going to be an election in 2024 because the Liberal and NDP deal will hold. And if it doesn't, bear in mind, when the Liberals, when the New Democratic Party voted with the Conservatives to further erode carbon pricing, the government didn't fall because the Bloc voted with the Liberals. But there's a lot of dancing partners in that chamber. We're not going to have an election. It's always possible, never 100%. But I feel quite confident at this point that we're not going to see an election till the fixed election date of 2025. And frankly, I think that will be good for the country and good for our economy.
Will win a lot more seats, and you seem very confident about that. The Green Party has said that in previous elections, and that didn't materialize. So what do you think is different about this election or about the temperature of the Canadian population that makes you extra confident that the Green Party will succeed anything that it's had before?
Well, it's about the lay of the land and the context in which we're now operating. The disillusionment factor with Liberals is huge. The disillusionment factor with the NDP is huge. In my province in British Columbia, there are so many people who say, I'll never vote NDP again. I believed them when they said they'd fix education. I believed them when they said they'd stop logging old growth. I believed them when they said they'd reduce greenhouse gases. So as a British Columbian, there's a very big change in how people feel about the other parties. And there's a lot of concern about Pierre Poilievre and the brand of conservatism he's brought to the table. So, the more time we have to prepare, obviously, honestly, And yeah, the time will help us because we are rebuilding. And Kitchener Centre was a very strong signal that the rebuilding we're doing, and obviously credit to Mike Morris as MP for Kitchener Centre and credit to Mike Schreiner as leader of the Green Party of Ontario, we're seeing a shift in Ontario. We see seats that are winnable in Ontario, if it elects Greens in Ontario, in Atlantic Canada, more in British Columbia, and the territories. So we're looking across the country at winnable seats. Then it's up to us to get it to continue, as with Jonathan's help, as a team, rebuilding and convincing people that we are a competent team and that we can do this together.
And if I can add, the next elections will be and will have to be a referendum about the nature of this country. It's not a referendum about a carbon tax or about affordability or the Trudeau legacy. It's a referendum about who we are as a country, as a nation. Do we want to be led by someone who will continue, who's made his political capital on the back of division and pitting Canadians against one another, or do we want to actually build for the future and be strong again? Right? There is no future for this country through division, but there is immense, tremendous opportunities if we join together and work together. And this is not the kind of leadership that Monsieur Poilievre is able to bring forward. This is not the kind of leadership, sadly, that Justin Trudeau has demonstrated throughout 8 years of some failures on the federation front, on all the promises that have been broken. So there is an opportunity for a strong progressive voice, and as Elizabeth said, we're the only one in the room right now.
Ms. May, you talked about giving teeth to international climate and trade treaties. What are some examples of teeth you'd like to see in those?
Okay, well, to contrast, by the way, just as a footnote, I've got more detail that is easily findable in the Hill Times Boxing Day edition. Laid out the differences between the ozone treaty that worked and the climate agreements that haven't. And of course, there's other differences between the issues, but in terms of how the agreements were negotiated, having enforcement mechanisms matters. You can't go back and renegotiate Paris, but we can make sure that the world of the rise of the WTO, I suggest to you, is the reason that the Ozone Protocol of 1987, the Montreal Protocol, succeeded, and the 1997 Kyoto Protocol didn't. What's the big difference between the architecture of the agreements? One was enforceable with sanctions that would have an effect. The other had no enforcement mechanisms at all. Neither does Paris. We have legally binding treaties for climate, but their only enforcement mechanism is essentially public shaming. It's not a good mechanism to get countries to keep their word. So what we can do now is make sure that in the world of trade agreements and in the world of WTO compliance, it's clearly understood, as some of the agreements and some of the appellate rulings of the WTO suggest is the case, that when you have a multilateral agreement of the importance of the Paris Agreement, that measures taken by any country that are to achieve those goals, and particularly to achieve the goals of the recent COP28 UAE consensus, those are not subject to trade punishments. You look in the history of the last few years, India's efforts to move fast to solar were challenged by the U.S. under the WTO regime. We should make sure at this ministerial, because there is global governance over trade, that as a matter of multilateralism, a matter of trade ministers dictating to that bureaucracy that is global, we're not taking trade actions against countries who are making the steps that are necessary to achieve goals that are agreed upon by every country on earth. It's now agreed to these goals of tripling renewable energy installation by 2030 globally. So if countries want to do that, and they can't at this point, it would be absolutely contrary to global governance, to the notion of multilateralism, to have countries doing what the U.S. did to India in having a trade complaint about it. This is not a minor shift. It's one of those things that can change the whole global response to climate is to get the WTO in its proper place, which is managing trade agreements, which, by the way, Green Party supports trade agreements that are fair and well negotiated. We voted for Canada-Ukraine. I still don't understand the Conservatives' argument for why they didn't vote to support the Canada-Ukraine trade deal. But we have a very, very clear set of criteria around when we will support a trade deal and when we won't. It has to be fair. It has to advance global goals. In this case, we need to have the WTO ministerial in February put as a top order of decision that this is the climate WTO ministerial and really deliver. I mean, to me, it's quite startling, and it's completely a coincidence that the 13th WTO ministerial is in the United Arab Emirates. Very short distance from when Sultan Al Jaber declared that the decisions out of COP28 were the United Arab Emirates consensus. They've branded their climate action, which was a complicated negotiation, but they want to take the bow. Okay, now deliver. And Canada has to deliver. A WTO ministerial gives us a real chance to make a difference.
Just to go back to one of your earlier answers about election preparedness, if I heard correctly, it sounded like you're going to focus on certain ridings in the next election. Does that mean you're not going to run candidates in every riding?
We will run candidates in every single riding. We ran full slates in 2004, 2006, 2008, 2011, 2015, 2019. What happened in 2021 and not running a full slate is, to me, incomprehensible and will not happen again. We will run a full slate.
Sorry, yeah, no, go ahead.
Please.
Oh, yeah, no, okay. But if you're going to focus on certain ridings that you think are winnable, doesn't running an entire slate across the country take away from that objective?
Not actually, not in the past. I mean, we were able to win seats in the other elections with a full slate across the country. A full slate across the country is a way, number one, obviously, it allows Canadians to vote for what they want. And of course, the popular vote matters as well as the seat count at the end of the day. We will continue to press to actually fix our voting system before the 2025 election. In other words, it's not too late, speaking of the things for which it's not too late, for the Liberals to deliver on the promise. Like, obviously, it is too late to get a time machine and make sure 2015 was the last election under first past the post. But we could run the 2025 election, and we'll be making other announcements in the near future about how it would be possible to get rid of first past the post before the 2025 election, but it is possible. But what we want to deliver for Canadians is a parliament that looks as though we'd actually fixed the voting system. In other words, we have 5 parties right now in the House of Commons with us working cooperatively together. And if in every, back to your point, if in every riding, Canadians have a choice to vote for what they most want, we have to give them the option to vote Green in those ridings. That will register in terms of the popular vote. It builds the party to have many, many ridings where we go above 10% of the popular vote. But we can also make it very clear that in terms of winnable ridings, voters in those ridings tend to know and they get excited. I've seen it whenever we've won seats. It's been because the voters feel a groundswell of, we can elect a Green. Won't that be great? That'll be so cool. We can do this. And they get excited, and voter turnout goes up. So I say that the key ingredient to the way Greens approach electoral politics is that it really matters to increase voter turnout. So we're the opposite of the parties that use cynicism and voter suppression. We will never want to suppress anybody's vote. We want everyone, particularly young people, to turn out and vote. It's critical. So our philosophy, our strategies going to election is to increase voter turnout. Deciding somehow cynically not to run a Green in every riding will not increase voter turnout. We need to increase voter turnout everywhere.
Following up on that, I want to know how you plan to run a candidate in every riding, because we're seeing that Green electoral district associations keep getting deregistered, including nearly 20 that were deregistered as of December 31st. So could you speak to how you plan to have candidates in every riding and whether that's a concern to you?
Yeah, no, it is not a concern. So two things. The first is, of course, Elizabeth and I came back. Well, Elizabeth came back. I just
back.
arrived.
You're back.
I'm back, or I'm here. And of course, that brings about we're shaking a party that needed some shaking, right? So there's a need to bring back discipline within the party, and there's a need to bring back focus on making sure that we elect Green MPs to represent Canadians and to deliver on the vision that our members have been putting forward for many, many years. So yeah, there are some people leaving. We are seeing some members decide that they're not interested in this anymore, and that's fine. Because we're focused on bringing new energy into this party and disciplined energy. This was always going to be a difficult task, where we took charge of a party that was in a very difficult state. I don't think that's a secret for anyone. And now we're actively, we've done a pretty good job with the fundraising in December. We're very happy with some new staff people joining us to rebuild our communications and our ability to communicate with Canadians. And we're really focused on that. So EDAs, deregistering is not something of major concern to us right now. What is of concern is communicating our vision to Canadians as effectively and as often as possible.
But also, just to say how we hope to do it, things will be hitting the road. It's very important to. COVID had a big impact too. People not being able to be together in the same room. We will be going to every province and most of the territories in early 2024, certainly before the end of June, and in that effort, really meeting people again. And it's true, as Jonathan said, when you're pulling a party together and say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do it a little differently, you'll lose some people. But I also know that there are a lot of very dedicated Greens who are holding EDAs together. It's a very tough thing in any party to have volunteers who have to do an immense amount of paperwork and stress. And it's a surprise that any of them hold together in any of the parties in the current climate. But we'll be as we cross the country in a national tour, just sitting down with people in their living rooms, and if new people, some of the people who've just said, I just can't keep going as a volunteer doing all this work, we'll pull it back together. And I'm not at all worried about a full slate for 2025 or for 2024 if it should happen.
What do you make of Leslie Lewis's petition championing pulling out of international agreements, I suppose including the Paris Agreement?
Well, the question is, what does Mr. Poilievre say about it, right? Because quite frankly, this is something that exposes Canada and exposes Canadians. In a dangerous world, it is absolutely clear that we stand stronger and safer together using institutions that were built after the most cataclysmic war that we've ever experienced, and 2 nuclear strikes on Japan, and we decided collectively as humanity, as a family of nations, to come together and build these institutions. But I'm not surprised. And I don't think anyone who's been following the Conservative Party should be surprised to see them espouse the Trump-like policies of isolation and division. Again, this is a man who's built his political capital on the back of division, not of bringing people together, not of making sure that people are able to work together. In fact, he thrives best when people are divided. And so, of course, he'll want to pull us out of these agreements. But yeah, I'd be curious to see what he has to say on this. I think Canadians need to know. Thank you.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.